what if I told you one of history's greatest empires ended with a king rotting alive in his bed? In September 1598, Spain's formidable monarch Philip II lay dying far from battlefields at his own palace monastery of El Escorial. He had built an empire of which the sun never set, spanning Europe, the Americas, and beyond. Yet in those final weeks, this once mighty ruler was brought low by a gruesome illness that turned his body into a grotesque ruin. The story of Philip's last days is as fascinating as it is horrifying. Philip II was emperor of a world-spanning realm. By the 1590s, the Spanish Empire attained its greatest power, extent, and influence under his rule. He was king of Spain and Portugal, master of Naples, Sicily, Milan, the Low Countries, and vast territories in the Americas. He had subdued Catholic Europe's enemies, from Ottoman Turks to Protestant rebels, and even built the Grand El Escorial monastery as his royal seat. The king himself was a stern, austere figure, always dressed in black and obsessed with order. He earned nicknames like the King of Paper for his endless bureaucratic diligence, and he was a devout Catholic who believed he was defending Christendom. But how could a king with such power fall to something so ordinary, yet so monstrous? The tragedy began in mid-1598 as Philip wintered at El Escorial. Despite his emperor's son status, he was not spared pain. Shortly after arriving at his palace on the slopes of Sierra de Guadarrama, he suffered a high fever. His doctors watched in alarm as a vicious infection took hold of his body. Philip's illness quickly took a horrifying turn. On the 7th day of the king's illness, an ulcer grew on the muscle of his right knee where dangerous pus had accumulated, one contemporary account notes. In other words, a festering wound opened up on his leg filled with rotten discharge. No medicine could heal it. His doctors even feared they would have to cut it wide open to let the poison out. By then, the infection had already spread into his bloodstream. In modern terms, Philip was suffering from sepsis, a deadly body-wide infection caused by bacteria from the wound. This was no clean deathbed. The massive pus on his leg began to leak, and kept leaking. After a crude surgical drain was placed, massive amounts of foul fluid poured from the ulcer. One record chillingly reports that so much impurity was purified from the wound that over 40 times in one day the fluid ran out. Imagine his attendants changing bedpans and linens hour after hour as gangrene gushed from the wound. Day after day, the king became weaker, yet his body refused to heal. During these weeks, Philip grew steadily more emaciated and sickly. His famed gout still tormented his hands and feet, but now combined with a deadly dropsy, fluid retention, and consumption, likely tuberculosis. According to one physician, the king looked like skin and bones, a mere skeleton of a man, eyes sunken, limbs swollen and leaking. Vicious diseases joined forces against him, leaving his body wasted. Men who once bowed before a mighty ruler now saw a hollow, deformed shape, racked by pain, shaking with delirium, and fouled by his own filth. Every movement was agony, every breath a torture, as the fever and infection turned his flesh into a living death. Could this really happen to a king? A man who had once fought religious wars and united crowns was now helpless in his bed. His fingers were twisted with gout, no longer fit to hold sword or pen. His own body had betrayed him. The proud emperor lay abandoned by his health, consumed by a sickness that would mock every memory of his greatness. Philip spent his final days at El Escorial, the grand complex he had built as a monument to his reign. Its marble halls and vaulted ceilings became the setting for a nightmarish scene. Courtiers, nuns, and doctors whispered outside his chamber, while inside the stench of decay filled the air. Contemporary sources describe him clutching at prayer books and relics, as devout and terrified as any commoner trapped by fever. His devoted wife and son stayed nearby but could do little. A devout Catholic, Philip was said to have received the last rites and even beheld masses from his bed, but only half conscious, slipping in and out of terrifying delirium. Day by day, the infection ate away at him, His legs grew black with gangrene. His genitals and rectum broke out in painful sores. The rotting tissues began to smell so foul that attendants gagged when entering the room. The whole bed reeked, one chronicler might say, and yet the king could only pray to be taken away. At one point he managed to scribble out orders and hold audiences, still technically ruling an empire while death sapped his life. He even laughed softly when his doctor announced he was dead, because he was not dead yet. The gaunt, feverish king continued to miraculously linger. Then on September 13th, 1598, the end finally came. After about 50 days of relentless agony, Philip II finally met his end, according to one account. The once mighty emperor died in his own dark monastery, hours after the infection at last claimed him. He breathed his last on a humble bed, a crucifix in his hand, his face twisted by pain yet mercifully relaxed at last. Even at deathbed he was famously devout. Some say he saw his suffering as a kind of purgatory or a penance for his sins. When the king died, it was at dawn, fittingly an end as spectacularly grim as his life had been glorious. Preparations followed swiftly. Embalmers worked long and hard to give dignity to what had become an almost inhuman corpse. His swollen body and festering wounds were washed, stitched, and covered before the skeleton itself was laid to rest. The grand doors of the Escorial's royal crypt closed on Philip II, ending a reign that had shaped the world. Philip II's death was grotesque, but it left a stark lesson. This was the king who had declared himself God's champion, yet even he could be humbled by insects and disease. By some accounts, lice and flies even infested the king's body in those final days. An ultimate irony that the monarch who once said he would rather lose all my estates and lives than let one hair of religion be bent should end up at the mercy of the smallest creatures. Historians note that while contemporary medical reports focus on his internal infections, folklore of the time did claim his flesh was crawling with vermin. The sight of Philip's decay shocked even his most loyal courtiers, the champion of the Catholic kings lying in death so low. His legacy, however, was not undermined by these final horrors. Spain remained the great power he had built, though his successors would struggle under the weight of his wars and deaths. In the grand narrative of history, Philip II's gruesome end became a warning of human frailty. Even the mightiest can fall. In the end, Philip II paid the price of the very health and piety he had maintained so obsessively all his life. And the story of that fate, a king at the mercy of rotting flesh, reminds us of the fragility of power. If you find this tale as astonishing as we do, let us know what you think in the comments. Please like this video if you enjoyed the dark history and subscribe for more stories from the past. Don't forget to click on our next video for another unbelievable historical drama. The past is filled with surprises, and we're here to unearth them all.